Welcome back to the Max Turn Podcast. This is James Finch. I am solo today. No Kyle. He's probably week to week. Take a page out of the NBA's phrasing, per se. We'll say week to week load management. I'm pretty heavily into tax season right now. He's probably knee deep in a lot of tax work as I record this. So we'll hope he returns in the next few weeks at some point. But for now, I'm gonna just kind of dive into some things that have happened in the past couple of weeks, I'd say, since the last time we recorded. A couple extensions that I want to make sure I cover here. But to kick us off, not too long before I hit the record button here, some news out of Philadelphia. John Tortorella, head coach, is no longer the head coach. Relieved of his duties by Danny Briere, Flyers GM. This is an interesting one. I don't want to say it's been brewing for too long, but I think at least the writing was kind of on the wall in recent weeks that this could be a move that was made, whether it was now or in the off season. With all the different, I'd say, healthy scratches, just some interesting decisions we've seen that are kind of normal for Torts, but maybe a little not shocking, but odd in the eyes of a lot of us as far as how he handled some roster decisions, as far as how he handled development of some younger players. We've seen Michkov, Cam York, players of that caliber being healthy scratches at times. And that's sometimes okay, but it just seems to be a little more often one of the cards that Torts likes to play. This season, Travis Konechny, not as strong of play as you'd expect from him. And now that he has that big deal, that's kind of another knock, I could say. Then we've got a recent quote from him at the end of a game where they lost, and he pretty much says, and I guess I'll read the exact quote, "This falls on me. I'm not really interested in learning how to coach in this type of season where we're at right now. But I have to do a better job, so this falls on me getting the team prepared to play the proper way until we get to the end." End quote. The specific part in there that is really eye-catching or ear-catching, I guess, if you listen to him say it, "I'm not really interested in learning how to coach in this type of season." That, to me, is almost a coach kind of setting up his own firing. Maybe not, but that's just a real interesting to say and to not expect some type of fallout from that. So Tortorella's gone. Assistant Bradshaw takes over for the rest of the season. So I guess he'll get a little bit of a look. As far as Tortorella, I don't want to say everything was bad, that there was some good development there. One of the big ones, honestly, is Rasmus Ristolainen, the type of player he was coming over from Buffalo and what he is now is completely different and for the better. So it's not like things went absolutely terrible for Tortorella in Philly. Obviously, it didn't end the way anyone would have wanted it to, but there are some positives there. I think it's fair to question Philly a little bit, just kind of looking at their roster right now. Last year, they were making a pretty strong push towards the playoffs, um, unexpectedly in a way. And I think it's fair to question maybe whether or not they should have leaned a little more into rebuilding that team. Maybe be a little more aggressive in acquiring assets for Ristolainen. They moved a lot at the deadline this year, but maybe that needed to be a little bit sooner of a thing. Maybe you get a little bit better of a price if you moved him last year or in the past off season. With all the wing depth that they have, Tippett, Brink, Forster, Michkov, could it have been a good idea to try and cash in on Travis Konechny in a trade? I don't know the answer for that for sure, and I'll even hold off on giving my exact opinion for now until I can look into that further. But with kind of where the team's at, a little bit of a step back from last year, fair to question whether or not they chose the right path here. As far as Tortorella, the last thing I want to kind of throw out there is he's a fairly unique style of a coach, a little more old school. It's not going to work for every team, but it's certainly attractive for certain situations, I'd say. A few teams that I could potentially see having interest in him for next season. New York Rangers, if they decide things aren't quite working with Laviolette, which, I mean, they still need to make sure they make the playoffs this year. I could see him being on his way out for sure if they miss the playoffs. Boston, going to miss the playoffs. They let go of Montgomery. That could be a job that Torts could be after. The third one I'm going to mention is Nashville. Definitely a team that has just this offseason looked like they were going to push and push and push to be a cup contender, and it just did not work out. Pretty much everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. I don't know if that's the right situation or not for Tortorella, but it's also a fairly veteran team when you look at the key pieces on that team. Maybe that is a good fit for him. So those are kind of three teams that stick out right now to me. But yeah, so Tortorella out in Philly, Bradshaw takes over in the interim. Moving on from that, I want to talk about a couple extensions, and I'm going to start with the Adin Hill extension. This is one that happened a few days after, I believe a few days after we last recorded. So Adin Hill signs a 6-year contract, $6.25 million per season. That's a 6.54% of the cap in the first season, so next year. Looking at this, I would say it's an interesting deal for a couple reasons. So I want to start with Adin Hill as a player. So he's kind of been known in recent years, pretty good playoff goalie, comes in clutch in the playoffs. But looking at the past 2 years, so the 22-23 season, 25 games played. In the 23-24 season, 35 games played. Now, this year, he's at 43 right now at the time of recording this. He's probably going to end up finishing in the high 40s. Maybe he hits 50. But really, this is his first year as kind of the 1A goalie. In the past, he's been really usage-wise a little more 1B or backup goalie, and then he kind of comes alive in the playoffs a little bit. And part of that's due to injuries. So that's an important factor to point out. So workload is a little interesting. It's kind of the first year, at least in the regular season, he's kind of had the reins as the main guy. Now, his July 1st age was 29. So here's a goalie who was going to hit the market prior to age 30. Now, he gets 2 years over what we projected. We had a 4-year contract at about 5.65 AAV. So he came in a little bit higher. And, with a goalie hitting the market or expected to hit the market prior to age 30, it's not too shocking that we could see an elevated AAV with elevated length of contract. Considering those 2 extra years that he got over projected, getting an extra 580K over projected isn't too crazy. I think with the rising cap in the next few seasons, or it's at least expected to at a fairly high rate, this deal shouldn't be too much of a concern. I think the biggest question would just be 6 years. Are you sure you want to commit 6 years to a goalie who's really workload-wise in his first season as the main guy? So I want to point out from a contract comparable standpoint, the top projection or the top comparable that we had listed in our sheet for Adin Hill was Tristan Jarry. That was a 5-year deal with a cap hit percentage in the first year of 6.44%. So again, Hill received a 6.54% deal. So he comes in a little higher than that projection, the top one we had listed. I do want to throw out, because it's fairly interesting, that the top goalie we had in his comparable sheet, so that's not something we have out there as public information, but the top goalie we had was Elvis Merzlikins for the Columbus Blue Jackets, and his contract the first year was at 6.55%, so 0.01% higher than Adin Hill. So Hill kind of comes in right at really his top projection. We just had narrowed down kind of the main 5, and Merzlikins fell out of that. So it's not, again, that's another factor, I guess we could kind of say. It's not too crazy that he came in at that cap hit percentage. But again, it's just kind of injury history, usage history, 6 years at not an insignificant cap number. Is that the way you want to go as the Vegas Golden Knights? Something that I would say, I guess, to play devil's advocate here. At the point of this deal being signed, so a couple weeks ago, Adin Hill signing this extension, he was probably the top UFA goalie. And when I say probably, I'm going to say he was. We look at some other goalie extensions that have happened throughout this season. Logan Thompson, Mackenzie Blackwood, Karel Vizmelka, Charlie Lindgren, Kevin Lankinen. They all signed their extensions already. We were pretty much looking at Adin Hill as the only true even 1A option. Now that he's signed, we're looking at a free agent market of Jake Allen, Alexander Gorgiev, Adin Hill's backup, Ilya Samsonov. Freddie Anderson still able to be a good goalie, but is he able to play a top role? I'm not sure. Alex Lyon in Detroit. So there's not really many other options that could fill Adin Hill's current role on the free agent market. So there's probably a little pressure there for Vegas to get this extension done. If they didn't, and they don't love those UFA options, they're maybe looking at potential trade options. Just some that stick out. Maybe John Gibson with Anaheim, Thatcher Demko, Vancouver, Jordan Binnington, St. Louis, Tristan Jarry, Pittsburgh. Are any of those guys coming in and being clear, for sure upgrades over Adin Hill? I'm not sure. There's questions about Gibson's consistency throughout an entire season. Demko can be great when healthy, but health has been a major concern. Binnington's had his ups and downs. Jarry is kind of in the middle of a down season. And you're probably needing to give up assets for those players. Maybe not Tristan Jarry. Maybe that's kind of a deal where Pittsburgh's actually happy to get rid of the contract, but you might need to, I don't want to say might, through trade, you're probably needing to give up assets, which Vegas doesn't have a ton of, to replace Adin Hill, when you could kind of just sign Adin Hill now and not have to give up those trade assets. So I think just beyond Adin Hill as a goalie, his performance and his past usage, beyond Adin Hill himself, looking at the goalie landscape across the league, it probably did make a lot of sense for Vegas to try and get this deal done now. And if it meant needing to add an extra year to add another 250 to 500K over what you'd ideally be paying him, it might make sense to go there and to do that because of that goalie landscape currently. I want to point out, just kind of as a wrap up for Adin Hill and Vegas, they are projected by our friends at Cap Wages, so capwages.com. Probably the most user-friendly cap site, in my opinion. Similar feel to what Cap Friendly had. And also, I guess, a little biased, you can find our contract projections on their site as well within their player tables, or team tables, I should say, within their UFA and RFA lists. So definitely check out Cap Wages. But to get back to Hill and Vegas, per Cap Wages, about 8.8 in cap space this offseason for Vegas, which isn't a ton, but they don't really have a lot to get done as far as in-house. Nick Hague, who's having a down season on the blue line, he needs a new deal. Then you got Riley Smith, their deadline acquisition. They brought him back. I could see him staying there at a reduced number, probably a little less than he could get on the open market. Then you've got Saad, Olofsson, Holtz, Pearson. So kind of some forwards who shouldn't break the bank, any of them. And then your backup goalie, Ilya Samsonov. So, like, they're going to need forward depth. They're going to need to make sure they lock in a backup goalie, but they should have enough cap space to make all that happen. If they want it to be relatively quiet offseason. I know Vegas is not exactly a quiet team when it comes to making moves. So if they want a bigger deal to happen, if they want to go big game hunting and chase a Mitch Marner, they probably need to do something else as far as removing some significant cap space from their roster. But as far as what they need to get done, for sure, they should be in an okay spot still after this Adin Hill deal. Moving on from Adin Hill, the most recent big extension that we can talk about is Jakob Chychrun for the Washington Capitals, who are having a phenomenal season, and Chychrun being a part of that. He signs a max term deal to shout out the podcast you're currently listening to. So 8 years, $9 million AAV. That's a 9.42% of the cap at the start of the contract. Projected deal was 7 years, 7.85 AAV at 8.21% of the cap. I want to toss out there that is him getting a deal a little bit higher than we expected. Our top comp that we had listed in our sheet was Keith Yandel, which was a 7-year deal at 8.7%. So that's higher than his projection that we had, but it's a bit lower still than what Chychrun ended up actually getting. Similar look into our comp sheet for Chychrun. Again, not publicly available. The full comp sheet, we just list up to 5 in our contract sheet. The top comp we had was Morgan Rielly, which was an 8-year deal at 9.09%, which is still below the 9.42% that he actually received. So maybe we were a little low, but I don't know. I want to talk about the player a little bit. He's generally above average offense and average, give or take, defensively, sometimes a little better, sometimes a bit worse. This season, on the surface, he's been great for Washington. Goal and shot splits are in his favor for sure, but some of the expected numbers, so some of those more advanced numbers, expected goals for and goals against, are not in his favor. He has some power play deployment. He's not the main guy. Carlson still is, but he definitely is getting power play time. He's not used really at all on the PK. That's mainly Fehervari, Carlson, Van Riemsdyk, and Matt Roy that see time on the PK. Both Chychrun and Sandin are mainly not PK guys. So generally good offense, can be average, give or take, defensively. Some underlying numbers might give us a little pause committing this big of a deal to him. But similar to Adin Hill, I think it's kind of important to point out the general landscape. So looking at UFA, he would have been the top UFA defenseman. There's some other okay options for sure, but Chychrun would have been the top guy. Other top 4 UFAs, Neil Pionk, Aaron Ekblad, we'll see how his value is affected by his PED suspension. There's Provorov, Gavrikov, Brent Burns, Dmitry Orlov. Then you start getting into more of the fringe guys, Dante Fabro, a little bit lower Ryan Lindgren, who's had some issues with the Rangers and is now on the Avalanche. So Chychrun would have been the top guy. So factor that into getting an extension done now. Is there a little bit of a premium to keep him from going to free agency? Probably. I don't know how we can exactly quantify that. I don't think it really can be. But he comes in a little bit outside of our comfort zone. That said, I want to mention the salary cap, so we know it's going to be 95.5 next year for the 25-26 season. Then there were estimates released. So the season following that, the 26-27 season, $104 million. That's an $8.5 million increase if it does happen. The season after that, the 27-28 season, $113.5 million was the estimation. That would be a $9.5 million increase year to year if these estimates do end up occurring. It's okay if Chychrun doesn't quite work out and isn't quite the $9 million player. As long as he's still a positive impact and playing in that $7 to $8 million range, they're going to be perfectly fine. Again, per cap wages, roughly 14.1213 mil remaining to spend this offseason. They do have some pending free agents, Andrew Mangiapane, Lars Eller, Nick Dowd, Beauvillier, Radish, Alexiev, and McElrath on the back end. Overall, they've been pretty good with their cap. I mean, they've got Protas at 4 more years at 3.375. That's huge value. You have Dylan Strome, 3 more years at $5 million. Huge value. Rasmus Sandin, 4 more years at $4.6 million. Huge value. You've also got a top prospect in Ryan Leonard, Hockey East Player of the Year, probably joining the team by the end of this season and then being on a entry-level deal next season. This team's in a pretty good spot moving forward. Carlson's aging a little bit, which could play into this Chychrun deal. And another big factor, probably the last one I want to point out with Chychrun, is he age. So July 1st age, which is what we like to look at. So age of free agency opening, 27 years old. That's a bit lower than the norm for free agents. A lot of times we kind of see guys having contracts that cover some RFA and UFA years, which for Chychrun, because of when he started, this past one did. But becoming a UFA at age 27 at this high of a level or this caliber of a player, we don't see it too often. So the fact that this deal starts at age 27, that's great. It's better than signing max term 8 years for a 30-year-old and running into the late 30s. So it's a deal that we would have been a little bit cautious about, but it should be one that ends up being okay still, especially with those salary cap increases. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. Just doing a quick look on X to make sure nothing happened as I recorded. I guess I am seeing that Kaprizov is skating. That doesn't mean he's returning anytime soon for the Minnesota Wild. But it could be a positive sign. Looking at Minnesota, actually, they're in the first wild card spot, 2 games on St. Louis in the second, or 2 points on St. Louis in the second wild card spot. 5 points on the Canucks just outside of the wild card, and 6 on the Flames. So getting Kaprizov back, that'd be huge. So we'll see what happens there. To wrap this up and end, I just want to reiterate, be on the lookout for some content on our contract projections. We will release new ones in the off season, probably by mid-May, hopefully a little sooner. For right now, the projections we have out from mid-season, you can find them on X in our pin tweet, or you can find them at capwages.com. And as far as the podcast is concerned, Kyle is out week to week, but I'm going to try and continue some shorter episodes like this just to keep up analysis on current events happening. So keep an eye out on X at AFP Analytics. We'll let you know when an episode's out next week. Talk to you then. I'm back real quick, having some fun testing out that sound effect. As I hit end to the recording, saw my phone notification Dylan McElrath for Washington. I mentioned they needed a new deal for him. Depth defenseman, ends up signing a 2-year contract, $800K per year. We had 1 year at the minimum, $775,000. So it's right in line with pretty much what we would expect for him. So I believe that pretty much locks in the Washington defense other than Alexeyev for next season. So minor deal, not a huge thing happening there, but wanted to come back and clarify that deal is now done. Alrighty, until next time.